Attention, you're listening to The Todd Huff Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk and education. Be advised, the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. And now, coming to you from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, here's your conservative but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
Well, that is right, my friends. It's a pleasure to be here today. As always, appreciate you tuning in and joining us here on the Todd Huff Show, America's home, as Glenn just told you, for conservative, not bitter talk. It's a Friday. And there's a lot of stuff. Friday of Memorial Day weekend, so there's a couple things I want to do. You may have seen in the news here in the past several days that the Democrat Party has maybe reluctantly released the autopsy, if you will, the post-mortem on their 2024 election results, losing the White House and all these things, the Senate, the House. I want to talk about that. I also want to spend some time, as we typically do, on the Friday before Memorial Day, talking about this great nation and for those who sacrificed to help provide the things that we have in this nation today, as we remember those who have fallen defending this great nation. If you have thoughts, questions, feedback, anything you want to share with me, hit me up, 317-785-1030. Or if you prefer, Todd at ToddHuffShow.com. You can choose that route as well. Just make sure, my friends, you make it count. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And be sure to include the appropriate amounts of adoration and praise. I'm just kidding, but just a little bit kidding there. So, before we get started here today, my friends, you know one of the biggest challenges that conservatives have is finding ways to ensure our values align with the way that we live our lives. I don't mean the choices we make regarding how we respond to certain things. I mean the things like who do we do business with? Are they promoting things that are completely antithetical to what we believe in and so forth? And that includes the way that we invest our money. That's why I love what the team at 48 Financial is doing. They specialize in what they call biblically responsible investing. That means they screen out companies that don't align with our faith, with our values, so we're not funding things that go against what we believe in. Makes sense, right? Now, they do all the research, the heavy lifting. All you have to do is complete a quick and easy assessment. You can do that right now. It just takes a couple of minutes. I did it, and you can too. 48financial.com/Todd. That's where you would go to complete that assessment. 48financial.com/Todd. 48 Financial, because our money should work for our values and certainly, my friends, not against them. So you may have heard here, I'm going to reference a story today at Red State just to kind of set the stage here, because there's a couple things here vying for our attention. First, there's the drama surrounding how the autopsy of the 2024 election, the Democrat post-mortem of the 2024 election, how that's been, I'd say, maybe butchered. Just the whole process is dramatic, as things typically are with the Dramocrats. But I also want to talk about it's what its contents are, what's in it, what's not in it, what should be in it, and just electoral politics in general, the divide in this country, what that divide is based upon. That's what we're going to talk about here today. So here's the headline, redstate.com, DNC autopsy of disastrous 24 election election released. And it's as pathetic as you'd expect. Bob Hodge wrote this piece. Here's what it says. The Democratic National Committee finally released its autopsy on the 2024 presidential campaign, where then Vice President Kamala Harris was roundly crushed by Donald Trump, even after she blew through over a $1 billion war chest. Just sit there for a moment. Let's sit here for a moment and realize just how much money was spent in the 2024 election. And, let's also set the stage a little bit because, you go back in time, you go back a little bit to 2016. I remember, you remember, many of you, some of you may be too young to remember now. That's been 10 years ago if you're a younger listener, maybe you didn't follow politics closely, but the vast majority of you remember in 2016 what the political stakes were like then. Hillary Rodham Clinton, Donald J. Trump, this new candidate, stormed onto the scene in around this time, around June or July of 2015. That would have been almost 11 years ago now when he came down that escalator. I remember my wife had texted me, Todd, Trump is running for president. I've shared on here before. I didn't have strong feelings one way or the other, but I was most of what I knew about Trump at that particular time was just his appearances in the media or his production of The Apprentice. I think I shared with you when my wife and I were dating, when I would go and visit her when she was, at home or whatever. I'd stay there for a little bit and we'd watch The Apprentice. And I didn't like the show. I don't know that she liked it. It was just something that was on when we had time to spend together and we would watch it. And I remember thinking, I don't really like Donald Trump. And I remember as a kid, I've shared this on here before, if you grew up in the 80s, in particular the 80s, maybe the 90s, you just knew who Trump was. Trump was on TV. Trump would be interviewed by Oprah Winfrey. I remember those sorts of things happening. And everybody just kind of knew who Donald Trump was. He was in the news from time to time. Always brash, big personality, lots of opinions. Much of what you see today as president was the same sort of thing you saw from him as just a regular citizen. Now, a wealthy citizen, a successful businessman, and so forth. But I always knew who he was, but without I just didn't have many opinions of him until I started watching The Apprentice, and I just thought I didn't like it. I didn't really like the show. So I thought that here we go. We're going to be introduced to some drama. And of course we have been, but not all that is bad either. Sometimes the drama is necessary to clean up the mess, not drama for drama's sake, as the Dramocrats do, but drama for the sake of, listen, we're going to see this thing through to completion. I don't care what come metaphorical hell or high water, we're going to be going through this. So Trump comes down the escalator, but it wasn't long after that. I quickly, once I listened to a speech or two of his, I thought, this guy's saying the sorts of things that people like me think. People, and there's a lot of people like me and like you who had watched our Republican Party drive this nation. Well, the Democrats, of course, are trying to drive it off a cliff, and Republicans just have either no interest or not enough strength of resolve to defeat it, to stop it. And it was maddening. And I remember at the time saying there's two major problems with the Republican Party. The first is that it's not conservative enough. The second is that those who are conservative enough are wimps. And so you had these problems that were just exponentially getting worse, from our debt to open borders to just the deals that we were making around the world, the Iranian nuke deal. I go back to the time Clinton was in office and he negotiated the North Korean nuclear deal, which of course had a result of North Korea having nuclear weapons. So it's maddening to watch this stuff. This nation that I love being run by people who either didn't know what to do, didn't care about anything besides holding the office, or in the worst scenario, run by people who wanted to fundamentally transform this nation into something it was never meant to be. And so this is the landscape. It still is in a large degree, but this was the landscape in 2015 as we headed into the 2016 election. And I remember watching Trump position himself a master at communications and marketing and positioning. And it was him versus, I think there were 17 Republican candidates at first. I remember going to a Heritage Action event in South Carolina, and they had every person on the stage that was running for president. This included Bobby Jindal. This included Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, Carly Fiorina, Ben Carson, Jeb Bush, lots of people. Of course, I'm leaving people out just for the sake of time, and some I truly just would have to pause and think about. That's been 11 years now. But I went to that event, and everyone was there except for Trump. And I remember a friend of mine saying the reason Trump's not there is because he doesn't want to stand in front of that conservative audience. He's not a conservative. And by that point, I had said, I don't know about that, man. I don't see it that way at all. First of all, I think Trump's more conservative than you might be giving him credit for. Maybe not ideologically, but in practice, I certainly thought that, and I still do. And I also said that even if I don't think Trump's afraid to stand down an audience. I remember he was negotiating something, and that's what the conflict was, and I believe that. Anyway, so we had the election. At first, people on the other side mocked Trump. They laughed at him. They rolled their eyes at him. They thought this guy was a joke. Then he started getting some traction. They eventually began to take him seriously, but again, they thought that they were going to mop the floor with him for Hillary Clinton. Remember, the Democrat Party, who preaches superficial diversity with what do the people on the stage look like, color of skin, gender, and all this sort of stuff. That's the year that they gave us 4 old white guys and a Clinton. And of course, one of those was my personal favorite, sexy Martin O'Malley back in those days. But anyway, it came down to a race between Hillary and Donald J. Trump. And I remember the cockiness of people in the Democrat Party. They were going to wipe the floor with Trump, and they were prepared to coronate Hillary Rodham Clinton as America's first female president. Of course, we don't know how people identified in the 1800s, so who can really say for certain? But nonetheless, they were cocky. They laughed at Trump. But they were not laughing by the end of the night as Hillary Clinton lost that election. And it was a thing to behold. It was a thing to behold. I remember that day. We broadcast live here in Indianapolis on Freedom 95 that night. I had to, I think we went for about 4 hours that night. And I cut off around midnight or 1 a.m. And I remember when I left there, we weren't to the point where we could definitively call it for Trump, but I remember thinking he's pulled this off. He's done this. And of course, we know what's happened from there. I don't want to retrace all of that, but they are terrified of Trump. And they're terrified of Trump for a couple of reasons. Not because he's a fascist and a Nazi. That's what they want you to believe. It's not because he's trying to make himself a king. These are the stories they come up with to try to get people to come to the same conclusion they want them to come to, which is that Trump should not be president. You should elect a Democrat instead. No, my friends, they fear this guy because for the first time in a long, long time, there was someone at, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in the White House who was serious about implementing his ideas. He was serious about build that wall. He was serious about America first. He was serious about draining the swamp, and they knew it. And of course, in the days and weeks after the election in 2016, they cried and they said that Russia stole the election. I mean, the stupidity of this stuff. I remember anybody who still believes in Russian collusion is, can I say it, is acting a fool. There is no way that any of that ever made any sense. I've laid this out on here numerous times. The story was that Trump picked up his phone, called Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin, and said, listen, I need your help. convincing a bunch of Hillary supporters to vote for me in 2016. And Vladimir Putin said, on it, I've got a team of social media advertising specialists that can trick people on Facebook, on Twitter, on Pokemon Go to vote for you, even though they should vote for Hillary. And that's what we're supposed to believe happened. You know, a conspiracy's last step is not an advertising campaign. A conspiracy's last step, by the way, is much closer to some of the allegations you've heard people levy against Democrats in 2020, which is actually manipulating data. Now, I'm not saying that definitively happened, but that what I'm saying is that is much closer to what a final step of a conspiracy, of a plan is to actually steal an election. And I said that back in 2016. You want to actually somehow manipulate vote counts or make up things or take away votes that you don't want to have. That's what you would have. The people counting the votes. That's what you would want to. That's the level or the area of the manipulation and the scheme, not in some advertising campaign hoping that you were effective. And so this whole thing, all the hatred, all the rage, all the disdain, all the just faux outrage has been, it was started back then, 10 years ago, 11 years ago now. And so we went through 2016, Trump won. Of course, they never stopped for a moment, they being the powerful radical leftists that are in control of the 7 pillars of propaganda, in control of the media, in control of woke business, in control of the government. These are the folks who in control of science with COVID communications and all that sort of stuff. These are the folks who continue to work hard at every turn to keep Trump from winning. And they accomplished that by whatever means you think. They accomplished that in 2020. But Trump didn't go away, right? And by the way, they elected a guy. It never ceases to amaze me. They elected a guy in 2020. If you remember, I talked about this too at the time. There were a bunch of candidates, including the nutty Professor Bernie Sanders, who was running as an open socialist. The Democrat Party did not want him to be the nominee. This was, again, back in 2020. They were headed for potentially a contested convention where there would be no clear winner regarding the number of delegates secured during the primary process. And they didn't want that. They didn't want to have an internal fight between selecting a liberal Democrat or a radical leftist, a socialist. And so they picked up the phones, the Democrat Party power brokers, and they called people like Pete Buttigieg. They called people like Amy Klobuchar back in 2020, and they said, listen, we need you to step out of this election so that Joe Biden can be our nominee, so that he can defeat Bernie Sanders and we avoid these problems. That's who they thought had the best chance of beating Trump in 2020. And whatever you think about what happened, ultimately they succeeded. It was, again, a close, contentious election. And of course, there were all sorts of questions and problems, things that we're still fighting about today regarding election integrity that came from that election. But during Biden's reign as president of the United States, I remember talking about this prior to his being elected in 2020. The guy was not physically or mentally fit for office. It was obvious well before the 2020 election. But by the end of his term in 2024, it was beyond obvious that he was not fit. Nobody could deny it any longer. In fact, that first presidential debate in 2024 between Biden and Trump, the only one that Biden would eventually end up participating in because they no longer could defend this guy. Biden was a train wreck, and it was no longer possible to defend this guy and his capabilities and so forth, his fitness for office. I mean, it was embarrassing. It was terrible. It was as bad as you could possibly imagine. And there were people in the wake of that immediately, Democrats, who started calling for another candidate to be placed in Biden's spot. Biden really didn't have, I think Marianne Williamson ran against him in the primary, but there really wasn't a primary to speak of. He was largely uncontested. And so, but they got to that first debate and realized we can't win with this guy. This guy is out of juice. We knew it back in 2020. They did, by the way. They knew that he was a mess in 2020, but they didn't care. They knew he was the Trojan horse that they could use to get past the election and actually just run things themselves. This guy didn't do anything. I don't know. It's sad. It really is sad. But this guy was not effectively leading the United States, and it was obvious for all the world to see during that first debate. And so instead of allowing the people to get involved, they basically just hand-selected Kamala Harris and said, here's your new running mate. They pressured Biden to drop out of the race. I told you the backroom discussions and deals that were being made, the threats that were being levied. President Biden, I mean, I just speculated on some of this, but it's something like this. You better drop out of the race because if you don't, we're not going to defend you and Hunter Biden from whatever might come of investigations pertaining to Burisma and collusion and, getting alleged payments, backroom deals with Ukraine and so forth. You're on your own and all that stuff. Your legacy will be tarnished, and we're not going to defend Hunter. And then conversely, if you just cooperate here, we'll defend you. We'll try to defend your integrity, your legacy. Nancy Pelosi will go out there and say that you need to be on Mount Rushmore. True story happened, by the way. And we'll make sure that we do our best to defend Hunter. And that's effectively what ended up happening. So I got to pause there because I'm out of time. But friends, there's a lot of confusion out there about kratom. You've probably heard the headlines. Most of those are based on synthetic junk that is not even real kratom at all. Real kratom is natural. It's tested. It's handled with care, and that's exactly what you get from Christopher's Organic Botanicals. They're a family-run company. They partner directly with farmers in Indonesia. Every batch is lab tested. There's no chemicals, no fillers, no shortcuts. This is a trusted herbal option that's been used for generations, and it is a real alternative for people looking for something that doesn't come with a warning label a mile long. Do your research. If you decide this is a good product for you, you want to try Kratom, start with their Kratom Starter Pack. Use coupon code ToddHuff. You'll save 10% on your first order. Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. Truth, tradition, transparency. Time out for me. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. We're going through, because again, talking here about the autopsy, if you will, autopsy of the Democrat Party's 2024 election. And I'm setting the stage for how we even got there. And we're going through this and we're talking about, what really happened. So if we left with Kamala being hand-selected, no other primary process, and of course, she's thrust into the national spotlight, and she's campaigning against Trump. And of course, after the initial excitement, again, which is all about superficial things, the race of the candidate, the gender of the candidate, once you get down to the quality of the candidate, once you get down to the things that the candidate's saying, or really how well the candidate can perform, this is what leftists and Democrats look for. How cool do they sound when they say things? How well they perform during a speech, those sorts of things. And you got this lady, Kamala Harris, who is out there pretending she's on phone calls. You remember that? She was a gaffe machine as well. Not, of course, to the level of Biden. She's not, she doesn't suffer from the same cognitive decline. She's just flat out crazy with her political viewpoints and her radical leftist philosophy. And so they campaigned, and again, there weren't many reasons given why people should vote for Kamala that added up to make any sense. And we had the election. and Trump wins. Now, I want to caution you because I don't agree with the way that Bob Hodge here framed this, saying that Trump roundly crushed Kamala Harris. Because if you look at elections, if you look at this election, we are winning. It's like watching the NBA finals, or right now there's the Eastern and Western Conference finals in the NBA. You got the Thunder versus the Spurs, you've got the Cavs versus the Knicks, and you've got a 7-game series, right? And we look at the results. In fact, you go back through, if you Googled, the history of the Eastern Conference finals, and you saw this team versus that team in 1996 or whatever, the Bulls and the Pacers, you might see that was that the year it was 4-3? Pacers almost won one of those years, but regardless, maybe that was 99, I can't remember. But you can see, wow, 4-3 series, that was a close series, and you can go and look at the scores, and you can say, wow, that most of those games were very close, a play here or there. You can also go and find conference finals where teams were swept, and if you look at the scores of all 4 games, they really didn't compete closely, have much of a chance of winning any of those games. You'll also find examples of teams who might have gotten swept, but each of the games were close, but they just came out a point or two shy of winning the games in the series. And I would say that last analogy is the closest to the 2024 election. You had Republicans winning basically all the close elections. Now, that's good from a campaigning perspective. There's momentum. There's reasons to be optimistic, but you also realize that, half this country is either asleep at the wheel or has lost its mind. They bought into the narrative, or they're even worse, they're extreme, godless, radical leftists who want to see this nation changed fundamentally into something that it was never intended to be, that we should never allow it to be. But a lot of those elections, a lot of those states went to Trump, but it was still very, very tight. And that's where we are. And so the question then becomes, for the Democrat Party, or the party that lost an election, what happened and what did we learn from that? And so that's what they have here. They've done this report. But before I get into the report, I do want to mention how badly they just, as the article says, botched the rollout of this report. And here's a poll quote from another article cited at Red State. Democratic National Committee Chair Ken Martin on Thursday released the party's autopsy report on the 2024 election after facing intense pressure to do so. So they had this report, but at first he was opposed. The chair was opposed to releasing it because it was incomplete and he didn't agree with its findings and just kind of weird stuff like that. But he finally released it. It says Martin had been pummeled in public for months after he promised to release the report and then reversed course in December, saying he would not do so. It's one in a series of negative storylines that Martin has faced in his short tenure at the DNC, even as Democrats have made political gains in elections in the past year. So, CNN then was talking about this, and CNN did a short segment here. This has been tweeted about. Andrew Colvett is one who tweeted about this, but this is a summary of what CNN's report said. CNN has just spent an entire segment proving the DNC autopsy is every bit as bad and evasive as we expected. There are a lot of things in that version that are incomplete. This is a poll quote from CNN anchors. There are a lot of things in that version that are incomplete, and also it does not touch a couple of topics that a lot of people were very interested in and thought were the reasons for this report not being out. And here's the key point, and this is why I told kind of the summary of remembering how we got from, say, even back to 2016 to Trump to Biden to Kamala to Trump winning again. It's important what they left out here. There's nothing about Joe Biden and what happened in the debate, that debate where he literally was incoherent for all the world to see. There's nothing about Kamala Harris getting the nomination without any kind of primary process, which there wasn't, which we talked about. We framed it. These were decisions. It never ceases to amaze me. The Democrat Party somehow convinces its members, convinces a lot of Americans that it is the party for individual people. But in reality, it's elitists making decisions on behalf of the people who call themselves Democrats. There was no democratic process in choosing the nominee, Kamala Harris, during the 2024 election. You can tell me why that was the case. You can explain it away, but the reality is that nobody chose Kamala Harris outside of an elite group, the power brokers within the party. No one chose her to be the candidate. And that seems relevant. The quality of the first candidate, which people actually did vote on, Biden, don't know why they did, but they did. If there's no mention about him in the debate and the process of choosing Kamala, to pretend that is not a factor at all in the 2024 election is wild to me. Of course it was. But even beyond that, there's things that contributed to the Democrat Party's demise and their loss in 2024. That, again, I don't think the Democrat Party truly wants to accept. They don't want to accept that modern wokeness is not attractive outside of states that are really, really blue. It's not popular. It doesn't help you get elected in places in the Midwest. I don't care which state you're in the Midwest. It doesn't help in Wisconsin. It doesn't help in Michigan. I don't know if you call Michigan, I guess, isn't the Midwest, but it's on the verge of the Rust Belt. It doesn't help in Middle America. It doesn't help in Pennsylvania. It doesn't help in states like that. It might help in states like California, maybe. At least in San Francisco, give you credibility there. But it's not something that's widely considered to be helpful, at least amongst those who still have common sense and decency and believe in the truth about morality. Those things are not helpful. More to say on this, but I'm up against the time clock here, my friends. You've worked hard. You've made smart choices. Now it's about making sure that effort counts, not just for today, but for the future as well. Full Suite Wealth helps forward-thinking people with a coordinated approach to wealth, legacy, and legal planning, including private equity, private credit, and options strategies. They'll help you see the big picture, plan ahead, and make your success truly matter for the people you care about most. The goal is to give you a plan that stands the test of time. Visit FullSuiteWealth.com now. That's FullSuiteWealth.com. Jason and his team will help you build your legacy and secure your future, my friends. I've got to take a quick time out. You're listening here to Conservative, Not Bitter Talk. I'm your host, the one and only, the ever so beloved Todd Huff. Back here in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. I want to put a nice, neat little bow on just this botched report from the Democrats, this post-mortem, this autopsy, talking about why they lost in 2024. The release of this thing was obviously very mismanaged, but the report itself does not hit on the key issues, which we just did. Again, it's the quality of the candidate, the whole process of about Biden going through that first debate, Democrats trying to gaslight us, telling us nothing was wrong, he was totally fine. You remember people in the administration were telling us that Biden was just super sharp in one-on-one conversations. People were so afraid to have meetings with him because he was going to ask you tough, rapid-fire questions. Boom, boom, you better be on your game. It's just crazy stuff. They insist that this is true. Then they push him out there on the debate stage way past his bedtime, and an utter disaster ensued. Then they forced Kamala on us, and her campaign was, again, all smoke and mirrors, nothing substantive, hoping to win because she's a woman. She's trying to get people to, support her because of all these other superficial things. Nothing substantive. Terrible campaign. Woke candidates across, the spectrum. Woke positions. Just not good ideas. They don't want to admit that either. But that's why they lost. And it was close. It's a lot closer than I wish it was. But that's why they lost. But they don't want to admit that. In fact, they want you to forget about that. They want you to forget how deceptive they've been, how much they took away the voice of people in the Democrat Party in selecting who their candidate even was going to be. So that's what happened. And that's all I'm going to say about that, because I told you the other thing I was going to do here was spend just a moment. Spend a moment. There's things that we do each year. Each year, I want to spend some time doing things. We have the Thanksgiving, the true story of Thanksgiving, the real story of Thanksgiving. Of course, during Thanksgiving time, we always talk about Christmas and the gift of Jesus being sent to the world to redeem the world for its sins. We talk about the resurrection during Easter. We'll talk about America, the beauty of this country around July 4th. Things like that. Veterans Day. Those are things that we always try to carve out a little time for. And I want to carve out in the time we have remaining. It's not much. I wish it could be more. It's just hard to get to everything I want to get to. But I want to make sure that I spend the time that we have remaining here recognizing those who gave their lives in defense of this great nation. This nation, my friends, is a wonderful, shining city on a hill. It's not perfect. It is not perfect. It will never be perfect. And I know that because it will always be run by people, and none of us are perfect. None of us. In fact, the Bible makes it clear that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. In fact, I think the closer that a person gets to God, the more they realize their own personal depravity. Just listen to an old video clip from R.C. Sproul, who I love, by the way. R.C. Sproul talking about that very thing. We don't realize the depth and the depravity of our sin, just how rebellious and evil we've been in our rebellion against God Almighty. So this nation is not perfect, but it's still good. It's founded on principles that are good and true. And no, of course, I'm not talking about the racist things that happened with slavery. That's not what I'm talking about. That has been eradicated. That has been fixed. I am talking, of course, there's still racist idiots in this country. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the ideas that said, again, that you are a citizen and not a subject, that your rights come not from government, despite what MSNBC's Katie Tour believes. Your rights come not from government, not from a group of people sitting in a room casting votes. It comes from Almighty God. We are created with liberty and freedom. We can live our own lives, make our own choices, live in a country that has economic freedom, where we can prioritize, earn our money. Of course, I'm not saying in practice that a lot of this stuff, there's some real problems with some of the laws on the books and things like that. But this nation is still a tremendous step in the right direction when it comes to those things. Personal liberties, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of the press, even though we've got, professional deceivers running around in the media all the time. It's good to have these freedoms, these liberties. This is what we were given to exist on this planet. These rights are important, and we recognize those. And in order for us to have those, people have to defend them, because the nature of humanity is to become tyrannical. We've seen this throughout history. The nature of government is to grow and to take away liberty and to make, is to use force, to take away your choice, to make you comply. But our nation was different. We're not a special people. We have simply accepted the truth, the way that this world was designed to work. And we've all been blessed tremendously because of that. But we wouldn't have those freedoms without the men and women prepared to give their lives for them. And this weekend, we remember those who do. And we should honor them this weekend, my friends. Happy Memorial Day, SDG.